Now, a lot of my work has been on preventing mass atrocity. Mass atrocity is the slaughter of unarmed civilians. That is what has happened in Camp Ashraf, and it is right. And I commend to you a small book on mass atrocity response operations that I put together with some colleagues from the U.S. Peacekeeping Institute. It's available on the web, but it talks about the challenges of responding to mass atrocity. And here, I think, is a place for us to roll up our sleeves and dig in. This is a very powerful tool for focusing attention and for galvanizing resources and commitment. And I think it is a place that the Camp Ashraf impending crisis cries out for analysis. And I would urge you to spend some time trying to think in very concrete terms about what would be required in the event that a political solution is not attained beforehand. So I guess what I would like to say in conclusion is that I do see a very special American responsibility to ensure the safety of those in Camp Ashraf until their final status is determined. And clearly it needs to be a priority to determine that final status, to work not simply with our erstwhile allies, the Iraqi government, which has been perpetrating these crimes, but also with our European friends and the international community. Because sovereignty is an important value, but it's not the only value. And the practice of foreign policy is about reconciling competing values. And here, in the case of our interests and our humanitarian values, we have a very clear call to action to focus attention on this and do it now. And if values and interests, when combined, are the most powerful call to action, you have an extraordinary narrative to tell. It needs to be explained in a way that can be heard in the context of a town and a country that is dealing with many challenges. But you have humanitarian arguments on your side, you have values on your side, and they call for action in the context of very clear American interests in ultimately changing the nature of Iranian governance to allow for democracy and freedom for the Iranian people. And so I look forward to continuing the dialogue with you about, practically speaking, how we might do that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mitch, and thank you, the organization from Northern California, for sponsoring this very important forum. I was just in the United Kingdom, and I'm sure some of you have seen it, the wartime bunker of Winston Churchill. And his words, never, never, never surrender. And I want to compliment you and your colleagues, Mrs. Rajavi, and the hundreds of people that will watch this, particularly the residents and victims in Camp Ashraf. And you are leading the fight for freedom in Iran. You fight in a much more difficult and much more dangerous place. And we compliment you on your bravery. We offer our condolences for your sacrifices, but we offer you our encouragement. Churchill also said once that the Americans could be counted upon to do the right thing in the end after they've exhausted every other possibility. Well, that's what I wanted to talk about a little bit today, briefly, if I might. My association with this issue really goes back to 1996, the Khobar bombing, which you remember took place in the eastern province of Saudi Arabia. At about that time, there was a change of policy in the administration, and the idea was that there was a new moderate president recently installed in Tehran, and the United States would take serious efforts to develop that relationship. And we began to get, in the FBI, directions in that regard, which we accepted. For instance, I got a call one day from the Secretary of State complaining that the FBI was photographing and fingerprinting the Iranian wrestlers who were coming into the United States. And then Khobar Towers happened. 19 Americans were killed. General Shelton, you and I sat in on meetings around this town in the aftermath of that. And we conducted an investigation where police officers were investigators. We're not politicians. We're not diplomats. And very quickly into the investigation, it became clear that although the attack was operationally performed by the Hezbollah in Saudi Arabia, the attack was organized, planned, funded, and executed by the IRGC. They had gotten the passports for the operators. They had funded them with cash. The general in the IRGC who was in charge of the project sat in the embassy, the Iranian embassy in Damascus, and gave them their passports. So we took all this information, this is 1996, now into 1997, and we presented it to the administration. I actually presented it to the National Security Advisor. And his reaction, I got a lot of different reactions around town the 9 years I was director. This was perhaps the most interesting one. When I told him that the IRGC and the Iranian government had murdered 19 Americans in the bombing at Khobar, his response was, well, who else knows about this? And I said, well, several dozen FBI agents, the Attorney General of the United States, and I think we should move to the U.S. Attorney's Office and procure an indictment. That was not on the agenda, and I respect that. Again, the issue was to try to develop a relationship with this regime. It didn't work, obviously, and in 1997, the MEK was put on the Foreign Terrorist Organization list at the request of the Iranian government and to appease the Iranian government. That bad decision has persisted for 14 years. In the Bush administration, and I have many friends in both administrations, I served in one, obviously, actually I served in two, technically, the offer came, again, to the United States government that the Iranian regime would control the operational use of improvised explosive devices in Iraq, and American soldiers, American service men and women would be protected. And that sounded like a really good idea, so we kept them on the list for another bunch of years. That obviously did not happen either. And as one of my colleagues said, more Americans killed in June of this year than last year, precisely as a result of this IED operation run by the Iranian regime. So the United States has not gotten a very good bargain in 14 years. And this group is not a terrorist group. As my colleagues have said, the MEK, the PMOI, however you want to define them, is not a terrorist group. Do you think for a moment that the likes of the people on this panel would be here if there was even a remote possibility that this organization was a foreign terrorist organization? By the way, we all keep contacts with our associations and our agencies.